She sat there still, but everything inside her was moving, shifting like the ground beneath her feet had finally cracked open. Janelle Brown wasn't the type to cry on camera. She held things in. She smiled politely. She made it work. But in this moment, her silence said what words couldn't. This was a woman who had just cut the final thread between her and a man who had once promised her forever. Not in a courthouse, not with paperwork, but where it mattered most to her, in the eyes of God. And what happened next shook the foundation of everything Kody and Robyn had tried to hold together. Because it wasn't just a breakup. It wasn't just emotional distance after years of growing apart. Janelle didn't just walk away from a man. She stood up and walked out of an entire belief system. She chose her soul over a struggle, her peace over the performance. And the moment she received a spiritual release from her former church, from Dave Watson himself, she didn't look back. No more pretending, no more holding it all in for the sake of unity. No more being the quiet one who kept sacrificing pieces of herself just to say she belonged. But here's where everything shifts. Because Dave Watson, the very man who signed off on Janelle's spiritual release, the one she trusted to make her separation official in her faith, is now being sued by his own wife. Accusations that almost mirror the emotional abuse and neglect Janelle silently endured for years. Are we witnessing a system cracking from the inside out? Let's rewind before we lose the gravity of this moment. Right now, Janelle is spiritually, emotionally, and mentally free. Not legally divorced, yes. But in their world, a spiritual release is even deeper. It's the unwritten vow broken, the soul tie undone. She no longer claims him. And more importantly, she no longer lets him claim her. And for a woman like Janelle, who built a life on quiet strength and endless compromise, that is everything. She's been the steady one, the one who made it bearable. Not loud like Christine when she walked, not cold like Meri had become. Janelle was loyal, practical, patient, until she wasn't. And when she snapped, it wasn't with shouting or chaos. It was with clarity. She looked at Kody and the years of not being seen, not being chosen, not being loved the way she needed. It all came to the surface in one heartbreaking conversation. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. And it hit even harder. We all watched that slow burn for years. The missed anniversaries, the forced interactions, the sense that Kody didn't even know who Janelle was anymore. And maybe, just maybe, never did in the first place. When Christmas came and Kody made his infamous, "You choose your kids or you choose me" speech, that was the beginning of the end. And instead of begging to stay, Janelle took the hit. She felt it break inside her but didn't whimper. She simply decided, this isn't love. Not anymore. Janelle wasn't asking for perfection. She wasn't asking to be the favorite. She just wanted to be treated as an equal. But instead, she got pushed aside for Robyn's emotional monopoly. And while everyone saw Robyn crying and Kody spiraling into blame, Janelle was finally stepping out of the shadows. Not louder, but stronger. Pause for a second and think about how many years she stayed. How much she endured without complaint. Then ask yourself, what finally made her say enough when staying silent was all she ever did? This is where we start peeling back the layers. This isn't just a woman leaving a relationship. This is a collapse of a belief system, a public undoing of a man who thought control looked like unity. But unity at the cost of respect isn't love. And what makes this even more gutting is how cleanly it all happened. No screaming match, no court battle, one spiritual conversation, and she was released. Just like that. One signature, one discussion. After decades of marriage, sacrifice, and family building. But don't think for a second that this came without a cost. Because while Janelle walks away lighter now, Kody and Robyn are watching their kingdom fall apart. The center isn't holding. And the one wife they thought would never step away just did, quietly, firmly, with absolute certainty. And here comes the twist. The man who gave her that spiritual release? He's now facing allegations not so different from the way Kody treated his wives. The foundation of their spiritual world is cracking, and none of them are safe from the fallout. What started with Christine exploded with Janelle. So where does Meri stand now? And can Kody survive the truth that Janelle chose freedom, not fear? The real unraveling is only beginning. There was a time when Janelle still hoped something would shift. Not a miracle, not a complete reset, just a flicker of connection, one meaningful conversation, one moment where she didn't feel like a stranger in her own marriage, but those moments never came. And the longer she waited, the clearer it became. Love without consistency is just noise. And Kody? He was loud, but his presence was hollow. The last few moments they shared on camera weren't exaggerated. They weren't played up for drama. In fact, that's what made them so telling. The distance between them wasn't in screaming or slamming doors. It was in the empty room, the lack of eye contact, the way their conversations ended before they began. It was in Janelle's face, every time she looked away to protect herself from breaking down. These weren't lovers arguing. These were two people standing in the ruins of something that was already gone, but too sacred to bury without a ritual. During their last major sit-down, Janelle tried. She really tried. You could see it in the way she made space for his anger, tried to help him feel heard, even though no one had made space for her pain in years. She sat across from a man who seemed more invested in preserving his version of authority than preserving the woman in front of him. He kept talking about loyalty, about family responsibilities, about leadership. But Janelle? She needed something so much more basic. Respect, tenderness, partnership. It almost felt cruel the way Kody kept repeating the same phrases, the same questions, as if expecting her to fold. As if saying, "You're choosing your kids over your husband," was supposed to feel like a betrayal, not a basic instinct of a mother protecting her children from chaos. And Janelle didn't explode. She didn't throw anything. She sat, let him talk, and then you saw it. The subtle shift in her eyes. That was the moment it broke. Quietly. She didn't yell, but she let him know. She wasn't going to abandon her children for a man who only showed up when it benefited him. And still, he didn't hear it. Not really. Kody kept circling around guilt and control, while Janelle was already mentally packing boxes, separating herself layer by layer from a life she no longer recognized. This is where the emotional emptiness started taking over. Janelle wasn't angry in the way Christine had been. She didn't want revenge. She didn't even want a dramatic exit. She just wanted peace. And when you've gone years without emotional intimacy, you start mistaking silence for comfort until you realize you were just being erased. Their last shared moments were marked by absence, not presence. They barely touched. Kody no longer looked at her like a wife, and Janelle stopped expecting to be seen. That's the kind of loneliness people don't talk about. The kind that exists even when someone's right in front of you. When Kody said he didn't feel supported, it was as if the years of Janelle defending him, compromising for him, backing his decisions, didn't hold weight. As if everything she gave him disappeared the second she asked for emotional accountability. And here's where it cuts deeper. She still didn't hate him. Even after all of it, she wasn't cruel. She never joined the other wives in full rebellion. Janelle simply sat in her truth long enough for it to speak louder than her silence ever could. That kind of heartbreak doesn't need an audience. It just needs honesty. What makes her story different is the emotional fatigue. She waded through grief, through change, through every reshuffling of love in the family. But she couldn't wait through invisibility. No one should have to. And when she walked away emotionally, she didn't slam the door. She left it open, not out of hope, but because she knew he wouldn't follow. That's what made it final. Everything that came next was already written in that blank space between their words. The eye rolls, the pauses, the withdrawn affection. It wasn't one fight. It was a collection of unmet needs stacked so gently on top of each other that by the time it crumbled, there wasn't even dust left to clean up. And now, looking back, every silence between them feels louder than any argument ever could. You're going to want to remember this feeling, because where Janelle goes next isn't just rebellion, it's rebirth. For years, she held on because she believed that what she shared with all of them, was sacred. Not perfect, not always fair, but sacred. A covenant. a calling, something that stood beyond emotion or dispute. That was the foundation this family was built on. But slowly, painfully, that ground beneath her started to shift. Not from one betrayal or some single event. No. What broke Janelle down was the slow unraveling of meaning. A love that stopped feeling holy and a bond that no longer brought peace. She started asking herself questions she never used to allow. Hard ones. Quiet ones. The kind that keep you awake at night. What if loyalty isn't love? What if staying isn't strength? What if all these sacrifices, spiritual, emotional, financial, only served someone else's sense of power? And more than anything, what if God never asked her to stay silent and suffer? She had pushed those questions down for years. There was always some distraction, a birthday, a move, a change in dynamics, always a reason to wait. But once Christine left, that illusion shattered. Not because she wanted to follow her, but because for the first time, she saw a woman thrive on the other side of walking away. That cracked something open. And once it split, it never closed again. Every conversation with Kody after that felt colder. Not because the words were mean, but because the connection was fading. And when he said he didn't feel like she respected him anymore, he wasn't entirely wrong. Janelle had spent decades trying to live a principle she began to question more and more with every dismissive look, every redirected conversation, every act of favoritism. When Robyn cried, Kody listened. When Janelle spoke, he lectured. And late at night, lying alone in yet another separate house, Janelle started to pull away spiritually. Not from her faith, but from the people who were using it to control her. She stopped feeling guilt for the doubts. She started embracing them like old friends she'd kept locked behind a door. She began to wonder, what if God was speaking through the discomfort? What if peace never came because she wasn't supposed to keep making herself small in a structure that centered one man's voice over everyone else's? This wasn't some crisis of belief. It was a reckoning. The quiet inner collision between reality and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. During those early days of questioning, she kept it close to her chest. She didn't make a speech. She didn't throw shade, but she started pulling her children in closer. Her independence started returning. That distinct spark she always had, her mind, her practicality, the steady strength, started burning again. Not by force, but from truth becoming impossible to ignore. She remembered who she was before she was folded into a system that rarely served her. And even though she hadn't said it out loud yet, the spiritual bond was already slipping. She no longer felt tethered to a man who couldn't see her, no longer anchored to a family dynamic that demanded blind compromise. And somewhere in that silence, she began to feel freedom. She prayed differently. She listened more to her intuition than anyone's rules. Her faith didn't disappear. It evolved. And that's what made this part so terrifying and so beautiful. Because when a woman like Janelle, who was never impulsive, never reactive, starts to say, maybe this belief system is broken for me, that's when everything changes. She hadn't spoken the words yet, but the vow in her heart had already cracked. Not from bitterness, but from truth. And the second you taste truth after years of repression, there's no going back. It didn't happen overnight. Janelle didn't wake up one morning and suddenly know it was time. But watching Christine leave, that planted the first real seed of possibility. Christine had done what they were all taught not to do. She broke the silent pact. She walked away from the dream they built, not in shame, but in full view, on camera, with clarity. And Janelle was there watching it all fall apart, feeling everything rise in her chest that she never had the words to say out loud. She saw pieces of herself in Christine's heartbreak. The loyalty, the years of trying, the nights of crying alone in a room while no one asked how she was holding up. But when Christine finally said, "I'm done," the earth shifted. Not just in the family dynamic, not for Kody, but for Janelle. For the first time, she saw what freedom actually looked like. Not reckless abandonment, not burning the whole bridge with fire, but quiet, intentional freedom. Christine wasn't bitter. She was peaceful. And peace, that was something Janelle hadn't felt in years. Not real peace. Not the kind that comes from knowing you listened to yourself, even when it hurt. But back then, she still wasn't ready. Not fully. She had one foot in and one foot out. Clinging to the hope that maybe her bond with Kody would survive as the dust settled. That she wasn't next in line to fall apart. She stood by him, for longer than she should have. She defended him on camera. She tried to explain away the imbalances. She even tried to stay neutral after Christine left. But when she looked around and realized he wasn't mourning the loss of her support, only the loss of his power, that was when the shift started happening fast. Kody didn't grieve losing her connection. He argued, he blamed, he deflected. It was all about control, respect, obedience. Christine's name came up constantly, like a ghost haunting every argument. And every time he brought her up, he only revealed how much he still wanted control over someone who already set herself free. Janelle watched it happen in real time, the unraveling of her own place in this plural marriage. And the comparison cuts ran deeper with every conversation. Christine had left. And instead of trying to understand what drove her away, he used Christine's departure as a threat, a manipulation tool. "Look what she did," he'd say. "Are you going to follow her too?" He might as well have said, "Know your place." But that was the moment he lost her. Because deep down, Janelle had been watching. She had seen Christine blossom into her own life, launch her own healing, rebuild her connection with her kids, and even find happiness again. She saw her smile more in the months after walking away than she had in years. And instead of causing fear, it gave her permission. Permission to listen to herself. Permission to put her happiness above an image. Permission to build something new that wasn't dependent on keeping a failing marriage afloat. The turning point wasn't dramatic. That's why it hit so hard. It came quietly. It was Janelle watching Christine pack her things and knowing somewhere deep in her bones that this wasn't betrayal. This was what bravery looked like. She realized she too had that strength. She'd always had it. She didn't need to scream to stand tall. She didn't need Kody's approval to validate her pain. She just had to trust what she already knew. And when she finally started admitting that to herself, even if she wasn't ready to say it out loud, everything began to change. That was the line in the sand. Not the day she walked out, but the day she saw someone else do it. And survive. Not just survive, but live. And the moment she believed she could live too, the season of silence ended. She sat in the quiet again. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't drowning her like it had before. This silence felt different, like stillness before a storm ends. Like breath finally coming back to her chest after holding it for too long. Janelle didn't need to argue anymore. She didn't need answers from Kody or reassurance from Robyn. She needed clarity, closure, and she knew, deep down, where to find it. So when Janelle reached out to Dave Watson, the man who spiritually oversees the path she's walked for years, it wasn't a whim. It was intent. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a loud statement. She wanted something simple, but sacred. A spiritual release that would sever the covenant between her and Kody in the one place it still lingered, before God. Contacting Dave was harder than anyone knew, because to do that, Janelle had to admit, not just to herself but out loud, that the spiritual marriage had ended long before now. She had to name the loss, mourn it in silence, and finally let it go in faith. She'd known Dave for years. He wasn't some distant leader or anonymous elder. He was part of their belief system, someone who stood as a spiritual authority for their family when they began this plural covenant. And now, she was returning to him, not as a loyal wife upholding a principle, but as a woman asking for freedom. And Dave listened, calmly, professionally, but the weight of that conversation was undeniable. For decades, Janelle had followed the rules. Chosen order, obedience, quiet endurance. She showed up, she submitted her will, she bit her tongue, even in moments when her spirit felt shattered. But now, she was asking for an end. Not in paperwork, not in public, but in the spiritual realm. Their shared belief that a marriage wasn't real unless God bound it, and it wasn't over until God released it. That moment was sacred, not exaggerated, not staged. It was heartbreak delivered through words. She spoke the truth as clearly as she could. That the unity was gone, that there was no more bond, that she had loved with all she had, but she could not stay connected to a man who no longer walked in unity with her spirit. And Dave agreed. He granted the release. Just like that, after decades of calling him her spiritual husband, Janelle was free. It didn't come with applause. There was no ceremony, but the shift? It was undeniable. Something broke, but not in a painful way, in a final, peaceful way that let sorrow be sacred and closure be clean. The weight lifted slowly, because even though it felt like relief, there was grief too. Grief for the younger version of her who once believed this path could bring wholeness, who believed she and the other wives were building something unbreakable. But that had changed. And now she was walking forward unbound. And here's where things twist again. Because while Janelle stepped into new light, Dave Watson, the same man who held her spiritual release in his hands, is now facing legal accusations from his own wife. The irony is brutal. The same kind of spiritual control Janelle's breaking free from is now at the center of another woman's legal plea for justice. Janelle's strength becomes even sharper in this context because she didn't leave with bitterness. She didn't expose. She didn't destroy. She chose dignity. She walked the line they taught her, but this time, she walked all the way through it. Her spiritual divorce wasn't a rebellion. It was a resurrection. The moment she looked at the faith that once held her and said, "Thank you, but I'm done now." And with that, without noise, without fanfare, Janelle became more than free. She became whole. For years, he stood as a spiritual gatekeeper, a man with reverence in his voice and control in his hands. To the outside world, Dave Watson was just a name. But to families like the Browns, he was the one who held the power to unite or untie a marriage, not by law, but by faith. He spoke softly, moved quietly, but his position was absolute. When Janelle contacted him for her spiritual release, she wasn't just reaching out to an old religious friend. She was approaching someone who had the final say in ending a spiritual bond over 30 years in the making. Dave didn't ask for headlines. He's never been center stage like Kody or any of the wives. He worked behind the scenes, operating under the silent rules of their shared belief system. The kind of leader who made choices not recorded by courts, but carved deeply into hearts. When he granted Janelle's spiritual release, it was official. There would be no more covenant in the eyes of their church. Janelle was no longer spiritually married, free to seek peace outside the bounds of polygamy, free to exist without the emotional leash of shared submission. But only weeks after Janelle walked into freedom, the ground trembled beneath the man who gave her that permission. Because Dave Watson's name didn't stay clean. Whispers turned into murmurs. Then murmurs turned into an open lawsuit, filed by his own wife. Accusations that mirrored what many women in their circle had been too afraid to say out loud for years. Emotional manipulation. Control disguised as spiritual order. A woman crying out, not just for justice, but to be seen after years of silence. And for those who paid close attention, the timing was more than coincidence. Janelle had spent decades navigating a world built on obedience under the name of faith. And the man who'd granted her the spiritual freedom she so deeply needed was now at the center of the very kind of spiritual dysfunction she had walked away from. She had broken free of a system, and the system cracked right behind her. For so long, these families, women like Janelle, Christine, and Meri, were told to trust the system, to believe in the leadership. That submission was holy. That sacrifice was spiritual maturity. Their pain was seen as refining rather than reason to leave. But now, with Dave under public scrutiny and legal pressure, one truth is becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't about just one broken marriage. It wasn't only about Kody. It was bigger. It was about the cracks running through the entire power structure. And for Janelle, watching this unfold must have carried a bitter kind of affirmation. She had felt emotionally discarded, spiritually small, pushed aside for years in a marriage where being good enough meant staying quiet. Now, the spiritual leader she once trusted to bind and release her covenant stands accused of doing to his wife what Kody so often did to his, turning control into doctrine. This isn't speculation. The lawsuit is real. The claims are happening now. A woman finally stepping forward, saying she spent years enduring spiritual and emotional imbalance, with Dave holding the title of her spiritual head. And suddenly, Janelle's release isn't just one woman reclaiming power from a man who failed her emotionally, it's part of something wider, something deeper, a dismantling of the idea that faith means erasing yourself. And yet, Janelle didn't rage. She didn't put Dave on blast. That's not who she is. She still made her peace quietly, trusting that truth doesn't always need to shout. And now, karma speaks louder than anything she ever could have said. The same system that once kept her bound is now facing its own reckoning. And somewhere behind all the noise, Janelle keeps walking forward, not smug, not bitter, just stronger than ever before. What once took everything from her now can't touch her at all. There was a time when he stood in the center of it all. 4 wives, nearly 20 children, a carefully constructed family empire built around one man's vision of control dressed up as faith. But you could see it begin to slip, not all at once, and not even loudly at first. The unraveling of Kody didn't come with one final betrayal, but with 1,000 ignored cracks, each one breaking a little louder than the last. And when Janelle made her exit, emotionally, spiritually, and with dignity, it shook something in him that was deeper than pride. It hit his illusion of who he thought he was. Because up until now, he still believed he had control. He was already reeling after Christine left, spinning publicly, blaming anyone but himself. But when Janelle, the most loyal, most measured, most even-tempered of them all, began to pull away, it broke through his denial, and he didn't know what to do with that kind of truth. So, like always, he lashed out, not in physical outbursts, but with that sharp, passive-aggressive way of speaking, blaming loyalty, questioning commitment, turning the idea of family into an ultimatum. And the bitterness? It only grew louder. He stopped hiding his favoritism. He stopped listening. And instead of asking himself why these women, his spiritual partners, were leaving, he poured all his energy into defending himself. At one point, it was almost tragic to watch. A man used to being the center of a household begging for obedience instead of love. We saw him unravel in real time, sitting across from Janelle, eyes burning with resentment, trying to twist her desire for independence into an act of war. But it didn't land. Not this time. Janelle didn't feed into it. She didn't reward his dramatics. She just stayed calm, as always, and refused to shrink herself back into the role he needed her to play. And that silence, that composed strength, it dismantled whatever grip he thought he still had. What made this moment so different, so painful for him, was that Janelle refused to give him what he needed to stay in control. She didn't explode. She didn't cry for him. She didn't fight to be accepted. She just stepped back. That kind of peaceful withdrawal confuses men like Kody. Because when someone who used to fight for you goes quiet, that's the sound of the end. And he heard it. Loud and clear. He started losing control of the narrative, too. One by one, the stories he used to tell about being the head of the family stopped making sense. The kids began to speak out. The cracks between households widened, and soon it wasn't just about marriage problems. It wasn't about wives being difficult. It was about Kody being exposed. Someone who couldn't handle being questioned, someone who demanded respect he didn't always earn, someone who wrapped his need for power in the language of faith and called it unity. And now he looks around and realizes what's left. Christine is gone. Janelle is gone. Meri, emotionally, had checked out long ago. And Robyn, she's all that's left. But even she can see that the empire he tried to build has burned down. He faces the cameras now with a kind of desperation. Still performing, still holding onto the ashes like they're gold. Trying to say, I did my best. While everyone watching knows. This is what happens when control replaces connection. Kody isn't just losing wives. He's losing the version of himself he spent decades performing. And without them, without the structure he could rule over, he's left with a spotlight he no longer knows how to stand in. She always said she believed in the family dream. Robyn came into the picture as the quiet sister wife with tears in her eyes and loyalty on her lips. She wanted to belong. She wanted to build. But slowly, as the others fell away, and as Kody leaned harder into her approval while fighting the rest, Robyn became more than a wife. She became the safe space for his ego, the last one standing, the one he chose to protect when everyone else was told they were too difficult, too distant, or too disobedient. But no amount of tears or spiritual talk could change the truth. Not anymore. Because now, even Robyn's seeing what happens when the show ends and the lights don't lie. The kingdom is crumbling, and she's standing on the throne of a family that no longer exists. When Christine left, Robyn was shocked. Disappointed, she said. She mourned the loss, but she stayed somewhat hopeful. But when Janelle followed, emotionally first, then spiritually in full, and with so much peace and certainty, the cracks hit something deeper. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't a rebellion. This was collapse. And suddenly, Robyn's not protected by the illusion anymore. Because it's not just about what Kody said, what he did, or who he blamed. It's about what's left. And what's left feels more like loneliness than love. She had once held her place with pride. The legal wife. The obedient one. But now that the rest are gone, what she's left with is the raw and messy truth. That loyalty at the cost of honesty is a cage. She's looked into Kody's eyes lately, and the man she sees isn't a husband holding a strong family together. It's a man spinning out, grasping for control, angry at everyone but himself, living in a story he can no longer control the edits of. And the sadness that creeps into her face in recent episodes, that's not about the wives anymore. It's about the weight she now carries. Alone. This isn't the family she signed up for. This isn't the unity she believed in. She had envisioned matching homes, sister wives supporting each other, a legacy forged through love and shared sacrifice. What she got was emotional isolation wrapped in spiritual expectations. Because when it's just you and the man who's pushed everyone else away, the silence gets louder. And it's not peaceful anymore. She tried in her way to make peace with the others. But peace doesn't mean convincing everyone to conform. Peace means recognizing when something's broken and having the strength to stop pretending it's whole. But Robyn's hope was built on preservation. She wanted the picture to stay intact, to prove the critics wrong. But now, even she can't deny it. This version of the family doesn't work. Kody rages. He blames. He plays victim. The kids pull further away. The other wives live fuller lives without his weight. And Robyn, she's still here. Not out of victory, but out of habit. It doesn't feel like the success she thought being the last one standing would be. It feels like being stranded. And now we're watching her face something she never expected. The cost of being the favored one with no one left to favor her. The crown feels heavy when there's no kingdom left to rule. She sees it now. Maybe not fully, maybe not with words yet, but in the way her voice grows tired in every conversation, the way her tears no longer change the outcome. Whatever they claimed this marriage stood for, whatever strength they said polygamy gave them, has revealed its final act. Robyn is living in the ruins, and there's no one left to pretend otherwise. She never needed a spotlight. Never demanded attention. Through all the chaos, all the changes, all the years sacrificing for a man who stopped showing up for her long ago, Janelle never made a scene. But now, as she stands alone for the first time in decades, no longer bound by Kody, no longer ruled by tradition, she doesn't look small or broken. She looks clear, grounded, stronger than ever, not because someone saved her, but because she saved herself. And that kind of strength doesn't just appear, it's forged. Quietly, day by day, through years of being dismissed, through holidays spent apart, through the lonely weight of pretending like things were still working. Janelle built her strength, not by yelling her pain, but by surviving it. And now, with the spiritual release behind her and the emotional scar tissue turned into armor, you can see it on her face. Relief. She's no longer waiting to be seen. She sees herself. And that's maybe the most powerful transformation of all, because when Christine left, it lit the first spark. When Meri emotionally detached, it struck a chord. But Janelle? She didn't make her move based on what the others did. She stood still, evaluated everything she'd built, everything she'd lost, and chose differently. She chose herself, finally. The emotional toll she carried was so deeply woven into her routine, she didn't even realize how heavy it had become until she put it down. All those years of compromise, the way she always tried to keep the peace, rejecting her own wants and needs, all for the sake of keeping the family image intact. But when that image finally shattered and the reality set in, she didn't resist the truth. She embraced it. And now, there's freedom in her voice. There's a new posture to how she speaks, like someone who's not afraid of silence anymore, not afraid of distance, not afraid of being misunderstood. Because now, her peace is her own, and no one gets to decide if she's worthy of happiness or belonging. This isn't just about leaving Kody. It never truly was. This was about shedding the years, no, decades, of doubt planted in her by a system that told women their whole worth came from how well they could bend without breaking. Janelle bent. And then she stopped. She started making decisions on her own terms, without permission, building her own life, claiming her connection with her kids again, strengthening the roots that mattered. She's not rebuilding a life. She's living one that finally reflects who she is at the core: independent, level-headed, strong-willed, and above all, deeply self-aware. And maybe that scares Kody more than anything, because Janelle was never the rebellious one, never loud, never disloyal. But she is the one who, when she leaves, does it fully and never looks back. She made choices not out of spite, but out of survival. She didn't destroy the family. She simply stopped sacrificing herself for its illusion. And in that decision, quiet, powerful, irreversible, Janelle found clarity. She's not waiting for anyone to understand. She's not hoping for apologies. She's done explaining, finished shrinking, and now, for the first time, standing not as one wife in a plural family, but as her own woman, unapologetically whole. And you can feel it. She walks differently now, not faster, not louder, just lighter. Because when a woman like Janelle stops asking to be chosen and chooses herself instead, there's no going back. Janelle's journey didn't end with drama. It didn't explode across the screen in chaos. It ended with something far more powerful: peace. Quiet, rare, unmistakable peace. That's what emotional freedom feels like when you've carried someone else's needs for decades and finally lay them down. Watching her now, you can see it. The shift is complete. The woman who once sat beside Kody in silence, hoping for connection, is now standing alone, steady, grounded, and resolved. Because the most dangerous thing a woman can do to someone who underestimated her is heal. And through all the heartbreak, Janelle never lost her dignity. That might be the most striking part. She never stooped, never clapped back. She stayed soft where it mattered and unshakable when it was time to walk away. She didn't need to burn it down. She didn't need to scream her exit. Her peace was the fire. Her clarity did all the talking. It's not just that she left. It's what she left behind. A legacy of self-respect in the face of emotional starvation. She proved that being faithful doesn't mean being invisible, that being kind doesn't mean accepting neglect. And above all, she showed what real spiritual strength looks like. Not in obedience, but in honesty. And now, the dust is settling. Christine has found her freedom. Janelle is walking in hers. Robyn is holding what's left of a kingdom built on fear and favoritism. And Kody is alone with his regrets, holding a mirror that he still refuses to look into. But the story isn't finished, because silence, as heavy as it is, has one final echo. There's one more piece still moving. One more heart still bound to a version of love that stopped loving back a long time ago. And that piece is Meri. You've seen her. Still hanging onto a thread that frayed years ago. Hoping, performing, enduring. She's given loyalty in silence. Stuck in limbo. Waiting for a place that no longer exists. And soon, very soon, she may finally reach her own crossroads. No longer waiting for Kody to see her. No longer begging for warmth in a marriage that's been emotionally gone longer than anyone's been willing to admit. You can almost feel it. Her storm is coming. If Janelle was the quiet strength and Christine was the bold exit, Meri just might be the final reckoning. Because when the last woman still clinging to the original dream finally lets go, that's not just an ending. That's the collapse of everything Kody tried to hold together with control and charm. And whatever comes next, we'll be watching. Every tear, every silence, every breath held too long. Because this isn't just reality TV. For these women, this is real life. Grown on sacrifice, transformed by truth. And if Meri decides to finally step out of that emotional waiting room, the pieces left behind may never fit together again. Let me know in the comments, do you think Meri will finally choose herself too? Or will she stay, even when there's nothing left to hold on to? One thing's certain. The final goodbye might be the most emotional one yet. And it's coming. Soon.